There comes a time in every person's life when failure knocks at the door. It might be the loss of a job, the collapse of a relationship, the disappointment of a dream that didn't unfold the way you thought it would. And when that happens, the temptation is strong to believe that failure is not just something you experienced, it's something you've become. But I want to tell you today, your identity is not defined by failure. Failure is an event, not a person. You may stumble, you may fall, you may even feel like you've hit rock bottom. But that does not change who you are at the core. Too many of us make the mistake of attaching our worth to our worst moments. We wear our mistakes like name tags, as if they are the final word on who we are. But the truth is, your identity runs deeper than any single moment in your life. Think of a seed buried in the ground. It looks lifeless. It looks forgotten. It looks like failure, but hidden inside is a potential for growth, beauty, and fruitfulness. Failure might feel like burial, but in reality, it can be planting. It can be the place where new life begins to spring forth. The most successful people you admire did not reach where they are without setbacks. They failed, sometimes publicly, sometimes painfully, but they refused to let those moments label them. They understood something vital. Failure is feedback, not finality. It teaches, it shapes, it refines, but it does not define. When you define yourself by failure, you shrink your story down to a single chapter. But your life is a book with many pages yet to be written. Don't allow one season of disappointment to steal the possibility of the season still ahead. You are more than your losses. You are more than the opportunities you missed. You are more than the mistakes you've made. Your worth is not based on your performance, but on your inherent value. The fact that you're breathing, that you're here today, means you are alive with purpose. And purpose doesn't get erased by failure. If anything, it gets clarified. The setback you thought was meant to destroy, you may in fact be preparing you for a stronger comeback. So, don't rehearse your failures. Release them. Don't identify with your defeats. Learn from them. Don't chain yourself to what went wrong. Anchor yourself in what can still go right. You are not what you did. You are not what you lost. You are not what others say about you. Your identity is greater, stronger, and more enduring than your failures. And when you rise again, and you will, you'll see that failure was never your name. Failure is one of those experiences that every human being encounters. Yet the way we interpret it makes all the difference. When most people fail, their immediate reaction is not just to admit they made a mistake, but to start believing that they are the mistake. They allow a single action, a single choice, or a single moment of collapse to seep in their sense of self, rewriting the way they see their identity. But failure was never designed to define you. It was designed to teach you, to shape you, and even to grow you. When we confuse failure as something we are instead of something that happened, we begin to shrink our sense of worth and confine our identity to the walls of shame and regret. Think about a child learning to walk. When that child stumbles, falls, and wobbles, no parent would ever say, "You are a failure." Instead, they clap their hands, they smile, they encourage, and they help the child back up again. The fall was part of the process, not the definition of the child's identity. In the same way, our missteps in life are not proof that we are broken beyond repair. They are evidence that we are learning, growing, and moving through the process of becoming. Yet as adults, we rarely extend ourselves the same grace that we so freely extend to others. We trip, we fall, and we start stamping the word of failure across our forehead, carrying it as if it is who we are. The truth is that no amount of mistakes can erase your value as a person. A diamond that has fallen into the mud is still a diamond. It may be dirty, it may be unpolished, but its worth has not changed. Failure may cover you in disappointment, but it cannot alter your intrinsic worth. No. You remain valuable, chosen, and full of potential no matter how many times you stumble. The danger comes when you start to internalize failure as a permanent label instead of a temporary experience. That is when discouragement settles in, and discouragement often leads to paralysis. Instead of getting up and trying again, people begin to settle in the dust of their defeat, forgetting that their true identity was never supposed to be written by that one chapter. When you believe that failure defines you, you live beneath your potential. You stop dreaming boldly because you think you are not worthy of success. You stop reaching for opportunities because you think the world only sees your mistakes. You stop giving your best because you assume your best will never be enough. But those are lies that grow when you let failure speak louder than truth. The reality is that everyone, even those you admire the most, have closets full of failed attempts, wrong turns, and bad decisions. The only difference is that they never let those moments dictate who they were. They kept moving forward, anchored in the belief that their worth was deeper than their worst moment. It is easy to see failure as final because it feels so heavy when you carry it. It comes with the sting of rejection, the ache of loss, and the frustration of wasted effort. But the heaviness of failure does not mean it has the power to rename you. The heaviness is temporary. What lasts is the truth that your identity was never built on perfection in the first place. When you strip away the external titles, achievements, and outcomes, what remains is your unshakable value as a person created with purpose. That is why failure can never define you, because your identity existed long before your first success or your first defeat. Consider history for a moment. Some of the greatest innovators and leaders in the world were those who carried a long list of failures, yet no one remembers them for the setbacks. They are remembered for what they did after. They are remembered for persistence, resilience, and the refusal to bow down to discouragement. Failure, in those cases, became the soil from which character grew, not the tombstone that marked the end of potential. The same can be true for you. But you must decide to detach your self-image from your shortcomings. Otherwise, you will spend your life dragging yesterday's baggage into today's opportunities. When you start to see failure as separate from your identity, you unlock freedom. You begin to take risks again because you know that falling does not redefine you. You begin to dream again because you understand that setbacks do not cancel destiny. You begin to walk in confidence because you realize your value is not hanging in the balance every time you try something new. That freedom allows you to approach life with courage, knowing that failure might bruise you, but it cannot brand you. The next time failure whispers to you, telling you that you are not enough, remember that it is only trying to confuse you. Failure is loud, but it is not accurate. It screams of loss, but it cannot touch your identity. You may have failed at something, but you are not a failure. Those two statements are worlds apart. The first acknowledges an event, the second condemns a person. Never let your vocabulary about yourself cross that dangerous line. Events come and go, circumstances shift and change, but who you are remains constant, valuable, and full of purpose regardless of outcomes. Your worth is not defined by performance, but by inherent value. This is one of the hardest truths for people to grasp because the world we live in constantly teaches the opposite. From the time we are young, rewards are given for grades, applause is given for achievements, and recognition is tied to results. If you perform well, you are praised, and if you stumble, the applause grows quiet. Slowly, almost without realizing it, we begin to believe that our worth as human beings is tied to how well we perform in life. We start carrying an invisible scoreboard, tallying every success and every failure, and letting that score dictate how much value we think we have. But imagine for a moment that worth was tied to performance alone. Who among us could stand without shame? Everyone fails. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has seasons where nothing seems to work. If our value as people rose and fell like stock prices based on performance, then life would be unbearable. There would be no stability, no security, only the constant anxiety of trying to prove that we are enough. That is why it is vital to understand that performance is not the foundation of worth. That's so. Worth is deeper. Worth is something you carry from the moment you were created. It is not something you earn. It is something you already have. Think of a newborn baby. That child has done nothing to prove themselves. They have not achieved anything, solved any problems, or contributed in any measurable way to society. Yet, when you hold that baby, you know instinctively that their life has incredible value. No one questions whether or not that child is worthy of love or belonging. Their worth is simply recognized. That is the same truth about you. From the very beginning, your value has been set. You are worthy not because of what you accomplish, but because of who you are. The problem comes when society, culture, and even family expectations begin layering messages on us that say, you will be loved if, you will be respected when, you will matter as long as. Those conditions slowly distort the way we see ourselves. We begin to confuse our identity with our job titles, our bank balances, our achievements, or our social recognition. And when those things are taken away or fall short, we feel like our worth is gone too. But those external things are temporary. Jobs change, money comes and goes, achievements fade, and applause eventually stops. If your worth is tied to those things, you will ride the roller coaster of insecurity for your entire life. True worth is unshakable because it is not built on shifting sand. You can lose everything externally, still not lose yourself. You can fail publicly and still remain valuable privately. You can be overlooked by others and still hold immeasurable worth. The question is whether you believe it. Because until you believe that your value is inherent and unchanging, you will constantly chase validation from places that cannot satisfy. It is like a person who owns a priceless painting, but keeps taking it to random strangers, asking them, how much do you think this is worth? Some may say it is valuable. Others may dismiss it as ordinary, but none of those opinions change the truth. The painting's worth has already been set by its origin and its design. In the same way, your worth is not something determined by passing opinions or temporary results. It has already been set, and it is higher than you imagine. Performance has its place. Striving for excellence, working hard, and achieving goals are all good things, but they are not ultimate things. They can enhance your life, but they cannot define your identity. If you succeed, it does not make you more valuable as a person. It simply means you reached the goal. If you fail, it does not make you less valuable as a person. It simply means you learned a lesson. When you understand this distinction, you begin to live with freedom. You can give your best without the crushing weight of believing your entire identity depends on the outcome. Many people spend their lives hiding their failures because they fear it will reveal that they are worthless. They wear masks, polish their image, and try to perform perfectly because they believe their value is on the line. But the irony is that pretending to be perfect only deepens the wound of insecurity. True confidence comes when you can face failure honestly and still know that it does not erase your worth. When you can say, yes, I failed, but I am not a failure. My worth remains intact. That kind of confidence is unshakable because it is not propped up by fragile performances. When you separate worth from performance, you also learn how to treat others with more compassion. You stop judging people solely by what they have achieved or failed to achieve. You start to see them as valuable simply because they exist. That perspective changes relationships, heals families, and builds communities where people are accepted as they are, not just for what they can produce. Your worth is like the root system of a great tree. The storms may blow, the branches may bend, leaves may fall, and seasons may change, but the root remains firm. Performance is like the fruit on the branches. It is important, it matters, but it is not the foundation. The root, your inherent value, is what keeps you standing through every season. If the fruit is abundant, you are still valuable. If the fruit is scarce, you are still valuable. The root does not change. Once you realize this truth, you stop living like a performer on stage, waiting for applause, and you start living like a person secure in who they are. You stop tying your identity to a paycheck, a diploma, or a scoreboard. You stop seeing yourself as disposable when you fall short. You begin to live from a place of stability, not striving. You begin to pursue goals with joy rather than fear. And you discover that life feels lighter when your value is no longer chained to your performance. Failure can be planting, not burial. It prepares you for growth. At first glance, failure feels like the end. It feels like a burial, as if the weight of disappointment has pressed you into the ground, cutting off light and leaving you in darkness. But what if the darkness is not a grave, but a garden? What if the moment that feels like the end is actually the beginning of something new being formed in you? Seeds must be buried before they can grow. They must go through the process of darkness, pressure, and waiting before they can break open and release the potential within. In the same way, your failures might feel like a burial, but they are often the planting ground for growth, transformation, and future strength. Think about the journey of a seed to the untrained eye. When it is dropped into the soil, it appears to have been lost. It disappears beneath the dirt, unseen and unnoticed. The seed itself even breaks apart in order for the new life inside to emerge. Without the burial, there can be no blossoming. Failure operates in much the same way. On the surface, it looks like loss, like something precious has been destroyed. Beneath the surface, unseen by others, something is happening. Lessons are being planted. Resilience is being formed. Character is being developed. The very pressure of failure often activates the potential that success alone could never reveal. Many people look at failure only as a closed door, a signal to quit, or a proof that they were never meant to succeed. But what if failure is actually a mirror showing you areas where you need to grow? What if it is not punishment, but preparation? Often the experiences that hurt us the most are the ones that shape us the most deeply. Pain teaches lessons that comfort never will. Failure develops qualities that ease and applause rarely cultivate. It humbles you, grounds you, and forces you to face what is truly inside of you. And while it may be uncomfortable, the growth it produces is often the very thing you will need for the next chapter of your journey. History is filled with people who discovered this truth firsthand. They experienced crushing setbacks, humiliating defeats, and dark seasons where it seemed everything was lost. But instead of letting those moments bury them permanently, they allowed those moments to plant seeds of persistence, creativity, and innovation. The result is that their failures became the soil of their greatest breakthroughs. Without those failures, they would not have had the depth of character or the wisdom to sustain their eventual success. In your own life, the failure you fear the most may one day be the very soil that grows your greatest strength. When you begin to see failure as planting, your perspective shifts. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what can this grow in me? That shift changes despair into expectation. It turns hopelessness into hope. It reframes the narrative of your life so that failure no longer feels like wasted time, but like a necessary step in your development. Even the soil that feels heavy and suffocating can be the very place where roots take hold. Even the seasons of hiddenness, when no one sees your effort, can be the seasons where your foundation is being strengthened. This does not mean failure is easy. Burial seasons are painful. They test patience, they test faith, and they test perseverance. But just like a seed cannot rush its way out of the soil, growth takes time. If you dig up a seed too early, you destroy its potential. In the same way, impatience in the face of failure can rob you of the lessons and growth meant to come out of it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do when failure buries you is simply to stay planted, to trust that the darkness is not permanent, and to believe that something is happening beneath the surface, even if you cannot see it yet. One of the greatest misunderstandings about failure is that it is final. People see it as a tombstone marking the end of their dreams. But in reality, failure is more like a cornerstone. It is the piece upon which new strength can be built if you allow it. Every failure carries within it the potential to produce something greater than what you lost. But that potential is unlocked only when you choose to treat failure as a planting ground instead of a graveyard. When you treat failure as planting, you also stop fearing it. Fear of failure is often worse than failure itself because it keeps you from trying. But if you know that failure can actually grow you, then even if you fall forward. Even if you stumble, you still gain something in the process. This mindset gives you courage to take risks, to pursue dreams, and to step into opportunities without being paralyzed by the thought of what might go wrong. The soil of failure, instead of frightening you, becomes a place of hope because you know growth is on the other side. Your failures may not make sense while you are in the middle of them. The soil feels dark. The waiting feels endless. The breaking apart of what you once were feels unbearable. But if you hold on, you will discover that what seemed like an ending was actually the beginning of transformation. Just as a seed must die to its old form to release its potential, you may have to let go of your old self, your old plans, and your old expectations in order to step into something greater. Failure, then, becomes not a curse, but a gift. It is the planting ground for new beginnings, new wisdom, and new strength that success alone could never produce. Setbacks are feedback, not finality. They shape but don't define. When you face a setback in life, the natural reaction is to think you've reached the end of the road. It feels like a door slammed shut, like the opportunity you were hoping for has been permanently erased. But setbacks are rarely the end. They are often a message, a teacher, a mirror showing you something that needs to be learned, refined, or adjusted. They provide feedback on your journey, pointing out what worked, what didn't, and where you can grow. They are not there to label you as incapable. They are there to sharpen your wisdom for the path ahead. Think about how inventors and scientists work. They rarely succeed on the first try. They run experiment after experiment, making adjustments based on the outcomes. If something fails, they don't declare the whole project over. Instead, they take the results as feedback, learning what to change next time. Thomas Edison, when working on the light bulb, famously spoke about finding thousands of ways that didn't work. But every one of those setbacks gave him information that ultimately led to a lasting breakthrough. What looked like failure was actually feedback, shaping the discovery into something world-changing. The same principle applies to your life. When you encounter a setback, you have a choice. You can interpret it as finality, telling yourself that you'll never succeed. Or you can interpret it as feedback, asking yourself what lesson it is offering. A lost job might not mean you are unworthy. It could mean that your skills are meant to be used in a different direction. A failed relationship might not mean you are unlovable. It could mean you need to grow in understanding patience or boundaries. A missed opportunity might not mean your life is over. It could be redirecting you towards something better. Now, the way you interpret the setback determines whether it imprisons you or empowers you. Seeing setbacks as feedback requires humility because feedback is not always easy to hear. It takes courage to admit that you might need to change, grow, or approach something differently. But humility opens the door to transformation. If you let pride convince you that every failure is an indictment of who you are, you'll miss the valuable lessons setbacks are trying to teach. When you shift your mindset and see setbacks as a kind of education, you begin to treat them as stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. Each setback shapes you into someone stronger, wiser, and more capable of handling the next challenge. One of the dangers of viewing setbacks as final is that it can trap you in fear. Stop trying because you're afraid to fail again. You hold back from opportunities because you don't want to face the pain of disappointment. Over time, that fear shrinks your world, keeping you locked in safety, but never allowing you to grow. But when you see setbacks as feedback, fear begins to lose its grip. You no longer view each attempt as a test of your worth, but as part of a process of learning. That perspective gives you freedom to keep moving forward without being crushed by the possibility of failure. Consider how athletes train. They push their bodies to the point of exhaustion, sometimes falling short, sometimes losing races, sometimes missing the mark. But every missed shot, every lost game, every fall on the track gives them feedback. Tells them where they need more strength, more focus, more discipline. Without that feedback, they would never improve. The same is true for your character, your skills, and your dreams. Setbacks reveal where you need growth, and that growth equips you for the future. Another important truth about setbacks is that they test your perseverance. Feedback is useless unless you are willing to keep going. Too many people quit just before their breakthrough because they mistake feedback for finality. They interpret a closed door as a permanent rejection rather than as redirection. But often, the difference between those who succeed and those who give up is simply the willingness to learn from feedback and keep trying. Persistence turns setbacks into stepping stones. Quitting turns them into tombstones. When you begin to embrace setbacks as feedback, you also become more resilient. You stop crumbling under criticism or collapsing under failure because you know those things are not defining you. They are refining you. They are shaping your abilities, your mindset, and your character. That resilience allows you to face life with greater courage because you know that even when things don't go according to plan, you will gain something valuable from the experience. You may not always control the outcome, but you can always control how you interpret it. The most successful lives are not the ones without setbacks, but the ones that learn to interpret setbacks wisely. They didn't let the sting of failure convince them they were finished. They didn't let the pain of disappointment make them bitter. Instead, they asked questions, looked for lessons, and used every failure as fuel for growth. That perspective turned what could have been the end into a new beginning. Setbacks will come. They come to everyone, no matter how talented, smart, or prepared you may be. The question is not whether you will face them, but what you will do with them when they arrive. Will you treat them as final, or will you receive them as feedback? Will you let them break you down, or will you let them build you up? The choice is yours, and the choice you make determines whether your story ends in defeat or continues toward destiny. Your life is a story bigger than any single chapter of failure. Too often, people read one painful chapter and assume that it is the whole book. They take a season of struggle, a mistake, or a loss, and begin to believe that this moment defines the entire arc of their lives. But a story is not determined by one scene. A book is not finished after one chapter. And your life is not over because of one failure. The danger comes when you allow the pain of one chapter to become the lens through which you view your entire future. Every great story has twists and turns. There are moments of triumph and moments of trial, moments when the hero rises and moments when the hero stumbles. The very essence of a meaningful story is that the character is shaped through both victories and defeats. Without conflict, there is no growth. Without setbacks, there is no resilience. Obedience. Without pain, there is no depth. Your story is the same. What you went through in one chapter may feel unbearable, but it is not the final word. It is only a piece of the larger narrative still unfolding. Think of some of the stories you admire most. The heroes you remember did not live lives of uninterrupted success. They fell, they failed, they faced challenges that seemed impossible. But the story did not end there. The beauty of their lives came not from the absence of failure, but from the way they rose after it. The strength of their legacy came not from a perfect journey, but from an unfinished journey that pressed forward in spite of imperfection. Your life works the same way. You are more than the worst thing you have ever done. You are more than the dream that fell apart. You are more than the mistake you made in weakness. Those moments are chapters, but they are not the conclusion. They add color, texture, and humanity to your story, but they do not erase your worth or your future. The key is remembering that chapters turn. A page flips. A new season begins. What feels like the end of your story may simply be the setup for the next stage of growth, healing, and redemption. When you hold too tightly to one chapter, you risk freezing your identity in a single season. People often say things like, I am a failure because my marriage ended, or I am worthless because my business collapsed, or I am unlovable because I made a mistake. But those statements confuse a chapter with the whole book. The truth is that your story is still being written. You are not finished yet. There are chapters ahead filled with possibility you cannot yet imagine. If you let go of the belief that failure is final, you open yourself to the idea that tomorrow may hold a surprise that rewrites today's pain into a testimony of growth. One of the gifts of failure is that it teaches you empathy and compassion. People who have never faced hard chapters often struggle to understand the pain of others. But those who have walked through failure, who have sat in the ashes of disappointment, who have faced rejection or loss, they gain a depth of character that cannot be developed any other way. That depth becomes part of your story, shaping you into someone who not only survives, but helps others along the way. What you thought was the worst chapter of your life may one day be the very chapter that gives someone else hope. It is also important to remember that you are not the author of every part of your story. Life brings circumstances beyond your control. People make decisions that affect you. Unexpected losses happen. But while you may not write every chapter, you do decide how to respond to them. You decide whether to close the book too early or to turn the page and see what comes next. You decide whether to let one season label you forever or to keep moving forward toward the bigger story unfolding. If you look at your life only through the lens of failure, you will always feel defeated. But if you zoom out and see the larger story, you will notice that the failures, while painful, were not wasted. They added depth, wisdom, and resilience. They forced you to grow in ways you would not have grown otherwise. And as you continue to live, you will see how those chapters fit into a story that is ultimately much bigger than the pain you once thought would break you. So don't stop at the chapter of failure. Don't close the book too soon. Don't let one page of pain convince you that the entire story is ruined. Your life is unfolding, and even though the chapters may look dark now, there is light ahead. The next page may bring healing. The next chapter may bring breakthrough. The story is not finished yet, and your best chapters may still be unwritten. Remember this: failure is part of your story, but it is not your identity. It is a page, not the book. It is a moment, not the whole journey. No single chapter has the power to erase the narrative of purpose that runs through your life. You are still here, which means the story continues. And as long as it continues, there is always hope for new beginnings, new strength, and new victories that will outshine the failures of the past.